I live on a ranch in Texas, and I'm starting to think I have a resident fleshy boy. I've always had weird things happen at my place. Always chalked it up to ghosts, rationalized the rancid smell as just my neighbor dumping dead cows again, and that maybe the coyotes were getting a little bit ballsy. But now I'm starting to think this is a fleshy boy. The things that make me think so started about 1.5 years ago. One night I was blanketing horses when I heard a woman's voice call out, "Hello?" None of the horses reacted, so I didn't think anything of it and just assumed I was tired. Once I got to the third horse in my row to blanket, I heard it again, "Hello," followed by, "Do you need help?" It was clear as day. Before I could jump, the horse I was blanketing jumped, and as I looked down the line, the other horses were against their doors, wide-eyed and looking around. It was creepy enough that for the next week or so, I would bring one of my dogs with me to do night checks if neither of my stable hands were there. Fast forward a few weeks, and I stopped bringing my dog out with me because I was feeling safe, but I noticed that coyotes were getting louder than usual. Of course, I rationalized it as the time of year they start having babies, so whatever, right? Well, one morning when I came down to feed, one of my stable hands told me that the night before, while sitting outside having a cigarette, a very larger than the usual ones here, coyote came around the house out of the backyard and just stared at him as he was having a smoke. He sat there eye to eye with it for several minutes before it seemed to lose interest and walked down past one of the barns and disappeared. The next night, he and the second stable hand were out around 1 a.m. having a cigarette when a coyote came around the other side of the house, through the covered driveway, and again sat and stared at them. When one of them ran to get his gun, he came back out and was already walking down the driveway towards the colt I had at the time. He raised his gun and it ducked behind the colt, who had to have seen it multiple times because it wasn't bothered, and disappeared. After that, we didn't see it anymore, until last spring. It was probably February when the odd things started again. Each calf that was born was attacked by what we rationalized as coyotes until we started to pay attention to the wounds. Repeatedly, it looked like the kill blow was to the face. The face was being ripped off and they were being drug out by their face and head. We put a no-climb fence around the cattle pasture and still these calves were being killed. At one point, a heifer was attacked too. Thankfully, she lived. All in all, out of 8 calves, only 1 lived. I still have him. Around that time, we were finding large dog tracks, larger than my shepherd's tracks, larger than my friend's Great Pyrenees tracks, and much larger than any tracks I've ever seen out there. Fast forward again to late August and early September. I no longer have the original 2 stable hands and have 2 new guys, who we will call D and J. About a week ago, D came to me and asked, "Have you ever seen or heard anything really strange out here?" To which I replied, "Yes. There have always been strange things happening out here." That's when he told me the 2 strange things he had seen. D said, "When you were gone last week, there was the one night I was running late to let the horses out. I had already let the first herd out and was bringing the last 2 of the second herd when they turned back to the gate and were looking toward the pasture behind me. So I turned to see what they were looking at and I could make out a shadow of a man. Mind you, this was 9 p.m. and it was already dark. He was probably 50 yards away and I could hear him call out, 'Hey, do you need help?' There was literally no one out there with me. It was just me and the horses." D seemed very shaken up by this. That's when he continued. "I would tell you what Jay saw, but he seemed shaken up too. A couple of days ago, Jay told me what he saw. Jay said, I was out there taking care of that border horse when I went to check waters in the corner pasture. It was like 9:30 p.m., and I was just finishing the trough when I could hear a man literally screaming for help. I looked up towards the property line where it was coming from, and I swear to you, I saw a man running along the fence line yelling, 'Help, help.' So I took off running towards the fence when it looked like he fell. I got up there and there was literally nothing. No clothes, no footprints, nothing. Then, as I started to walk back to the water, I could hear him again, but this time it sounded like he was in the very front pasture. There was no way he could have gotten there, and then it sounded like he was back in the neighbor's place. Nothing human could move that fast. I think it was trying to lure me. Needless to say, we all think it's a fleshy boy. No one really feels comfortable to go past the barns at night now, and when I do go to do the final checks, one of my 3 dogs go with me. It was mid-November 2021, and me and about 10 friends were camping in the woods in the Sawtooth National Forest near Petite Lake. There were 2 groups of 4 people in 2 tents, and 1 in a car, and me and my buddy were in hammocks near the edge of the camp. It was about 1 a.m. and we had all been sleeping for almost 2 hours. I wake up to my hammock mate panting extremely heavily and yelling my name. I was confused and got up to help him. He was paralyzed by fear, and he said that he had an extremely vivid dream that there was a black figure, tall and slender, trying to break into his car after he had seen this figure decapitate me and the rest of his friends. He said that he woke up to the figure near the car and saw all our heads stuck on sticks throughout the camp. He then proceeded. He said he clicked the car alarm button, and the figure began to run circles around the car and then stopped and dashed off extremely quickly into the woods. I was obviously freaked out at this point, and I immediately felt very uneasy, but I told him it was just a bad dream and that he needs to get back to sleep. Him and I tried for about 5 minutes, both stricken with fear at this point, when we hear our friend in the tent begin to yell, "No, no, don't take me." As a side note, we had not awoken anyone else in the camp at this point. This freaked me and my buddy out quite a bit because we had no idea what was going on. We were also very vulnerable in our hammock by ourselves on the edge of our about 50-yard across camp. Our buddy's yell proceeds to wake up most of the rest of the camp, and we find out that our friend in the car, that my buddy said clicked the car alarm, was awake. So all of us scared and awake have a conversation about what's going on, and the buddy in the car says that he heard scratching at the window and heard something pull the door handle. He also said that he had seen the black figure running around the car as well. We were all freaked out at this point and decided to move into the same tent. Our other friend with the dream also claimed a similar murder story to the friend in the hammock. The next morning, we all talked and so many of us experienced what had happened that night. 6 in total that we determined that it must have been some sort of thing that was giving us nightmares. We called it a Windigo, but we have no idea. Also, we had friends that stayed at the same site about 6 months earlier, and a few of them did notice weird things happening at the camp at night, like feelings of being watched, or the feeling of a being walking around the tent. There's strange stuff in the Idaho mountains. Okay, so a few years ago, back in 2014, I came across something that I had never seen before, and still to this day, I have no idea what it was. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was summer and the evening was hot and sticky. My best friend Kay and I were on our way to Winchester, Ohio. She had been dating a boy and they ended up breaking up like a few days before. We were going to this house to exchange property, and I was there to make sure everything went smoothly. After we did the exchange of property, we headed back to my town of Hillsboro. Winchester was like an hour or so away, so it was getting dark. We were on the back roads, listening to music and just jamming out. We were, what I am assuming, halfway home, when we were coming over a hill. Night had fallen. On the left side of the car was long grass. Like, it was super long, like taller than me. As we reached the top of the hill, we saw a black figure come out of the long grass. At first, we thought it was some random animal since we were in the middle of nowhere, but as we got closer, we realized that it wasn't. The figure was on all fours and crawled on its hands and knees. I know that if it had stood up, It would have been at least 6'4", maybe taller. When our headlights hit it, we got a better look at it, and it turned its head and looked at us. It was completely black and shiny, looking like it was dipped in tar. Its eyes were round and milky white. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth. I remember my blood ran cold, and Kay asked me what that was, but I didn't know. She asked me what we should do. I had a strange feeling that if we stopped the car, something bad was going to happen. So I told her to floor it and not to stop. As we got closer, it turned around and went back into the long grass. We haven't spoken about it since. Ever since I saw it, I've been trying to rack my brain, trying to figure out what it was. I've done research and have come up with nothing, and just thinking about it sends chills down my spine. Has anyone ever heard or seen a creature like this? I'm not going to try to persuade everyone that this is for certain a skinwalker or anything like that, but this crept everyone involved in this story out, including myself, a pretty big skeptic when it comes to this sort of thing. I posted this here because I have no idea where else I could turn to. It all starts when a couple of friends, who I'll refer to as Q, R, and S, and I wanted to have a guy's vacation and go camping, somewhere back in May of 2021. As a little backstory, Q is my best friend, and S was R's younger brother. We chose a spot that we had been to once before, but when we got there, we decided to drive out another 3-ish or so miles from the previous destination. The area wasn't extremely in the middle of nowhere, as some of you might think. There was a dirt road wide enough for a decent-sized truck to go up and down the road with ease. Once we decided on a place to camp, we realized that not a soul was in the general area for probably another mile. The only evidence that there was anyone near us was the distant sound of gunshots, as shooting was allowed in this area at the time. The only things alive in the area that we could see were larger than a bird, were the grazing cattle caged in by a fence. One of the main activities that we would be participating in was trapping coyotes. For those of you who don't know, coyotes don't require a tag to kill, and you can hunt as many as you want, as they are extremely quick to reproduce. We set up traps about 500 yards away from our campsite in a valley that a creek was running through. We could tell that this was a bottleneck for the coyotes to travel through, as many game trails were coming down to this choke point, and we were certain at least one coyote would come through there. We set up the traps and then headed back to our campsite. We got back and the sun was beginning to set. Being the middle of May, the sun was out in full force where we were at, approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We were already exhausted from hauling around the heavy trapping gear, but this heat was just making it worse. It got to the point where the only thing we could do was sit in what little shade we had and wait for a couple of hours until the sun was down. A few hours later, the sun finally sets and the temperature begins to drop. We search around with our flashlights to find any dry sticks and dead sagebrushes on the ground, all with the cows mooing in the background. Once we get our fire lit, we sit around and are laughing, reminiscing of old times and just being happy to be around each other. A few minutes go by and we're all just sitting around the campfire in silence when we hear a strange high-pitched whine. I remember S asking R what that sound was, and R tells him it was probably a coyote or something. The sound keeps persisting, and whatever was making it was getting close to the campfire. Every 10 or so seconds, the creature would call out. We went from laughing at it to just being confused the more we heard it and the closer it got. Then, when we heard the thing call once again, probably about 40 feet or so in front of me, it's silent for only about 5 seconds this time, and not even kidding. We heard the same call, but this time from only like 20 feet behind me. This might not sound scary to a bunch of you, but at that moment, it was chilling. We all scrambled up and we were feeling paranoid, so R assembles his .22 that he brought with us. Then out of nowhere, the creature is back to where it once was, about 40 or so feet in front of me again. We're all spooked and confused on how this is even happening. While Q, R, and S are talking, I pull out my phone and tell them to shut up and try to record a few seconds of the sounds this thing is making. We all decided to try to follow that noise and see if we could find anything. It seemed to be leading us somewhere, but we weren't sure. As we followed, the thing was keeping a good distance between us, no less than 40 feet at a time. We crossed the cow fence, which was quite the task because it was coated in barbed wire. It's a bit strange too because that creature crossed through it without any sound. It kept pointing us in a direction that was leading us to another creek, but as soon as we got there, we heard it from about 50 feet up a hill, which no animal could have done in that short of time without making any noise. We got shaken up by the whole thing, so we just went back to our tent. As soon as we got back, however, Q pulled me aside and mentioned that he thought he saw something duck down when he shined his light at the hill the creature was leading us to. Throughout the night, we kept hearing that thing circle our tent, making those whining noises the entire time. We ended up spending another night there with the same things happening, but no harm came to us. The whole thing was just super unsettling. We didn't end up catching anything on that trip either. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had a Sioux burial mound about a half-mile from our spot. After fishing for a better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put a clip-on light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where I had seen the fireflies. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf, but unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because its eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down, but it didn't make a sound. My friend yelled at it to try and scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back, mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things. So I yelled at it again, and it responded back at the same volume, same pitch, exactly like my voice. At this point, we realized this was not an animal. We both continued on the path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with this creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods and I could no longer see its eyes. We made it back to our vehicles and felt a sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear that talk back to me?" She said she did, and it sounded like my voice when it responded back to us. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I imagined it. We went over what had happened, and our stories were the same, except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend, who is Hmong, went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience for several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described the experience and asked for a spiritual cleansing of my own, they said that they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contact the management at the park. They said the park we went to had ancient Indian remains scattered along the river that were unmarked. They said there were more Indian remains in that park than any other park they managed. I contacted several Native American friends and was told the entity we encountered was a skinwalker. I know skinwalkers are part of the Navajo culture, but from what I read, it checks more of the boxes more than any other supernatural being or cryptid. So just a little background info. I've had encounters in the past in these same woods. Anyways, about a week ago, my fiance had told me she had heard this loud screeching coming from the woods. So, she knows of the encounters I've had, so I've made her wary of them as well. I was sitting at my desk playing PS5 when, through my headset with noise-canceling sound, I heard the screech. So obviously I'm like, what the hell? And then it went from a screech to a dog barking within a split of a second. My fiance comes running out of the bedroom saying, "Did you hear that dog bark in the woods?" I said, "I heard something in the woods, but I don't know if it's a dog." She then proceeds to run out there into the woods with her flashlight, and I literally have to chase after her. After all that I've been through with those woods, that's a big nope. So I'm out there with her, and we hear a couple of low barks, and then complete silence. Nothing. I mean, the wind even stopped. Just absolute dead silence. And I immediately got a knot in my stomach and told her we're going home now. So on our way out, about 200 feet, we heard another bark. And again, it's not a normal sounding bark. We have a dog. I know all the dogs in the area. It was not a dog. Whatever it was sounded straight evil. A distorted bark was what we heard last, and as soon as we got back onto our deck, the same exact barking that did sound like a dog started immediately again. I went right inside. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but the whole thing felt off. Let me know in the comments what you think. I wanted to share my own experience to see if I could get your opinions on what me and my family saw in the Black Hills of South Dakota. About 5 years ago, when I was 17, I visited some of my family who lived in South Dakota and worked there for a summer. After about a month, my brother, sister, and her husband decided to do what Americans do best and go shoot guns in the woods. I had to work an evening shift, so it was decided we go after around 10 p.m. Once my shift ended, we went to their house to pack up the truck with some snacks, guns, and ammo. The drive took around 45 minutes, and it took us up a dirt road, surrounded by trees and tall grass. Eventually, it opened up into a clearing that was pretty open and flat. The nearest tree line was about 100 feet away. It was pretty dark, but the clearing was lit up by the truck's headlights. I kind of felt uneasy, but I chalked that up to just being in the woods at night. For the first 20 minutes, nothing really happened. We were just setting up plastic bottles and those plastic gallon buckets you'd get water out of at an office. There was a feeling of being watched that we all felt. The area suddenly reeked of spoiled eggs. Those of you who have shot guns know they can smell, but even since going through the military, no amount of guns explosions have smelt this bad. We looked around to see if we could find the source, and what I saw I can still vividly remember to this day. What I saw was a thin humanoid figure crouching down looking at us. Even while crouching down, it was still about 6 feet in height. When I say this figure was thin, I mean skin and bones barely do it justice. The even weirder thing about this was we all saw the figure in different spots in the tree line, but we all described the same features. Tall, thin, had long dark hair. We quickly packed up what we could and left. The feeling of dread felt that day will forever haunt me. Since then, my brother mentioned the area might have been in native territory, but I don't know how if that's true. Every once in a while, I think back on that day, and I look up different stories and encounters people have in woods, but nothing quite resembles what I saw that day. I live in Western New York, and here's a little background info. At the complex my fiance and I share, it's heavily populated. Lots of houses on the outside of the property as well, but directly behind our building is a very large section of dense forest. When we first moved here 3 years ago, we used to go out there to smoke joints and such, as we didn't want to go out on our back deck. Shortly afterwards, we decided the woods were no bueno, so we would just smoke on our deck anyways. I've had 2 very strange encounters in the last 2 weeks. Also, I don't know if it was a crawler that I saw/heard, but I figured I would post here and see what everyone's opinion was. Anyways, about 2 weeks ago, I'm out on my deck/patio. We live on the 2nd floor, and there's a staircase leading up to the door that takes you up the stairs to the 3rd floor and whatnot. And I'm smoking a cigarette. It's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I hear a bunch of rustling at the far end of the parking lot behind our building out in the woods. So I look over there, and all I hear is this loud screech. I assumed it was some type of animal at first, but it kept walking a few feet and then screeching. It did this repeatedly until it was almost in front of me, but still in the woods, if that makes sense. At this point, I feel like something or someone is watching me. So I walk down into the parking lot, and as soon as I did, I hear the screech, but even louder this time, moving towards me. I ran as fast as I've ever ran in my entire life, back up the steps into my apartment, shutting and locking the door. About 10 minutes later, I open the glass door. We have a screen door on the very outside. And I still hear the screeching, but even further down and deeper into the woods. I haven't heard it since that night. I really don't believe it was an animal because I've lived relatively secluded most of my life at my dad's house, and I've heard animals and bugs and all that all the time. So I don't know, it was just really weird. The most recent event occurred last weekend. I was dead tired after I got off work at 11 p.m., and I was out on the deck smoking again, and at some point I fell asleep in my chair out there. So I wake up and it's about 3:30 in the morning, and I stood up, stretched, and then lit another cigarette. Well, at this point I've shaken off the sleepies and I'm kind of just scanning the tree line. As I'm doing this, near the far right corner of the parking lot, we have those tall cattails, or whatever they're called, the tall grass stuff. While looking, I lifted my eyes up because whatever was over there caught my attention right away. I swear whatever this was, it was maybe 7 feet, 7.5 feet tall, kind of hunched over and just staring at me. I noticed no other features that stuck out, just long limbs and a blank face. As soon as I looked at it, it turned and kind of galloped into the mouth of the woods and was just gone like that. I don't know if it was a crawler or just an animal making me look stupid, but whatever it was gave me the creeps. But that sums up my events. If I seem crazy, then do tell me so, because I'd rather that than be what it could be. Let me know what you think. Just a few quick updates. So last night, between commenting on here and playing some games online with my brother, I was up till about 4 a.m. again. Well, around 3:30 or 4 a.m., I was out on the deck again smoking. And I don't know, I just had a really uneasy feeling. So I put it out and went inside to get ready for bed. While going through and locking the doors, I heard a sound similar to what I heard the first time. I can't say it was the same thing, but it was very similar. It was very faint this time, maybe deeper in the woods, but I wasn't trying to stick around to find out. One more update. So the last week was mostly uneventful. Up until last night, that is. I was gaming out and ended up falling asleep in my chair. Well, I woke up and it was about 3 a.m., so I went outside to smoke my cigarette before bed and realized I had left the door unlocked. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just I've been super anal about keeping things locked up after reading various stories on these subs. Well, I'm outside and I hear the same type of screaming I heard the first time. also coupled with the screaming I hear, brush breaking throughout the woods. I mean, it sounds like something is shooting through there. Gradually becoming more and more concerned, I was turning to go inside when I heard this, I don't know, a cackle? I mean, it was loud. I thought at first it could be a bug or some small animal or something, but it just kept increasing in sound to the point where I almost thought it was a laugh. It was so damn loud, I'm looking around to the other apartments and nobody was up or around. I proceeded to lock the door and triple check it before finally being able to fall asleep. I don't know what's out there. I don't really want to know, but there is something. Seems like lately more and more is happening and I'm not too sure what to make of it. If anyone has any info on what I could have heard, please do share, as I am genuinely curious and somewhat concerned. Thank you for reading and making me feel less crazy. If and when anything else happens, I'll be sure to update.